Are you struggling with how to build a compelling portfolio to grow your photography business? In this episode, you're going to hear 6 tips from one of the industry's top photography consultants on how to build a portfolio that will connect you with your dream clients. Hi, I'm Lee Love, commercial photographer and filmmaker. And if this is your first time here, then this is where you're going to find encouragement, education, and mentoring to help you improve your photography and filmmaking. I know one of the things I struggle with in editing my own portfolio is that often I'm too close to the story, the backstory of what it took for me to create an image. And that affects my ability to be objective. When talking to other photographers, I find this is a common issue. When it comes to creating either a printed or online portfolio, the images we select and how they're presented is key to getting the kind of work we want, and more importantly, getting the type of clients we want. I believe this is why it's a smart move to have someone who's not only objective, but also has experience in working with other successful photographers to review our portfolio. Well, today I have a special guest who's going to help us with the problem of putting together a compelling portfolio. I'm thrilled to have Neil Binkley with me, and I think you're going to want to go back and watch this episode again, and you might want to take notes. Neil is a well-known and respected photographer's marketing and portfolio consultant. He's also the co-founder of Wonderful Machines, where he was the marketing and publicity director until 2010. He's been involved in judging Photo District News self-promo awards and photo contests. He's been involved in reviewing portfolios at the prestigious Photo Expo in New York, as well as ASMMP reviews in New York and Philadelphia. Oh yeah, by the way, did I mention he's an amazing designer? I've included a link to his website, which has a lot more background than I've outlined here. Neil is the real deal, and I appreciate his willingness to spend the time and expertise so we can understand how we can all improve our portfolios. Okay, enough jibber jabber. Let's jump right in. The first question I'd like to kind of ask you is, what are you think are the mistakes that most photographers make when doing their own portfolio?
I think if I could choose one thing, it would be that they choose images that are subpar. That, if they have a lot of good images in their portfolio, but they have 10 that aren't quite as good, people are going to remember the worst images. And that's been an adage that's been around for a while, but I think it sticks because it's true. Because a lot of times you might go to another photographer's website and you look and if you'd only seen their good work before, and then suddenly you just see a couple images that make you think, well, gosh, that's not who I thought they were. That's what a client will do as well. And so I think it's really important to be very critical of your own work. And I do think that you're right that it's hard to be critical of your own work because you know how much you put into that shot. You know that it took 10 days to get that client or subject to, agree to that, to show up at the right place. The background, or maybe it's somebody who you're friends with, or, that you shot for your portfolio, and it doesn't matter to the end client. They don't need the story behind it. If it's not a good image, that's what's going to impress upon them first.
So that kind of brings me to the next question, and that is, isn't this all subjective? I mean, how do you decide on what images to select for a portfolio?
Two very important considerations to me first most are to consider who your audience is. Who are you making this for? Are you going to be meeting predominantly with magazine editors? In which case you might be showing a different type of photo than if you're meeting up solely with hospital clients or something like that, or ad agencies who might require a little more production value, or they might, in the case of a hospital again, they might require, they would like to see pictures of people in hospitals, most likely, because sometimes clients don't have the imagination to see beyond what's on the page. And then beyond that, it's really just only use good images.
So that always brings up the question then, okay, how many images should I have in my portfolio? And now this may vary based on a print portfolio or digital portfolio, I don't know. But, you know, someone that's starting out and they don't have 1,000 images to choose from, what's the, I mean, is there a minimum or maybe like a maximum that you kind of recommend, or a rough idea of what people should put in their portfolio?
Yeah, it's something that I consider for every project. And my answer is it depends. And it depends to me on, well, I think, you know, who you're showing it to. Again, go back to who is your audience. Are they going to have the patience for a lot of images? I still think that personally, I would rather run longer sometimes. I know that that might go against some conventional wisdom, but to me, like I said, it's about, I consider each project uniquely in terms of page count, because if I only say, okay, you only have 50 images, then what if you have an extra project that you want to put into the portfolio that would, you know, sort of pole vault you to the next level in the eyes of your client. But that adds 5 or 10 images. I would add the 5 or 10 images because it's showing a greater capability. So I think, you know, the joke answer is you choose just the right amount. Don't choose too many images. The range that I do with my clients, sometimes it's dictated by them. Most of the times it's what I just think is appropriate and what I think is showing, you know, the widest variety of their work and subject matter and capabilities in the shortest amount of time or page space if it's printed. So the range that I'd say that I tend to edit towards is anywhere between 25 and 100 images. And
Okay.
25 to me is not enough personally, but I tend to want longer because I find, you know, I feel like I'm leaving out a lot of things, and it's you know, it's always painful doing an edit.
Tell me about it. I know it's painful doing my own edit.
Right. And part of it too is I think it's always harder to make something shorter. I mean, it's harder to make a smaller edit than it is a longer edit. So if you could have 1,000-page edit, I think it'd be a lot easier. But, you know, keeping it below 100, you know, maybe ideally, you know, between, you know, 50 and 75, maybe, you know, is, you know, because all you think about is what pictures you're excluding. So I think that's when it's nice to sometimes get an outside opinion. And so, you know, people like me, photographers, consultants, or photo editors, or, you know, designers, you know, we don't usually have the same emotional connection to the images. And so, for example, I can look at something and say, you know what, that shot just isn't compelling to me. And it doesn't, you know, I don't have the emotional connection to it. I don't know what went into it. All I know is if it's appropriate.
And so would you also say, you know, this shot has a potential. Have you thought about changing your post-processing or maybe cropping it differently? Is that also a service that a photo consultant would do?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question. A lot of times when I do an edit, I will pair images sometimes based on dominant colors in an image. So maybe there's a red background in one shot on the left side of a spread, and then on the right somebody's wearing a red, you know, sweater or something like that. And so sometimes I'll pick up on color similarities. And in some cases, excuse me, in some cases, you know, those reds might be a little more yellow in one picture than the other one. And, you know, if you didn't shoot them for the same campaign, the same story, the same project, oftentimes there might be a slight variation in hue. And so a lot of times my clients will go back and either retouch it themselves or have a retoucher do it for them so that they look better on the page together, because it does affect the presentation.
Spoken like a true designer, by the way. I mean, that's definitely a design mentality. I mean, not that all photographers don't have that, but I think that's certainly coming from a point of being a designer more so than a photographer.
It is interesting that you mentioned that about the design perspective, because I originally was working for ad agencies and design departments of larger, you know, Fortune 500 companies before I got into the photography industry. And when I started working on photographers' portfolios and seeing what they were using, I felt like they weren't making the designs fully dynamic or as exciting as, you know, I wanted to, when I design a portfolio, I want to make it look like a magazine layout or a book layout. I want images to bleed across the gutter sometimes. And you can't always do that with traditional books. I think it's often why I will, for example, use digital printing presses, to like, even Blurb or Picto, Pikto, which is in Canada, to do an 11x14 print portfolio, which, I have an example right here, which if you want to cut away to at some point, but I mean, it's big. The quality is very good these days with digital printing too. So it's not, I think some people maybe hesitated to use, digital printing in the past because it wasn't quite of the same quality as inkjet. And I know inkjet is, can be much more supple, and there's nothing quite like it. And you can also control it more than if a color is a little bit off in digital, it's sort of hard to get it reprinted. Usually they don't give you, unless they really messed up, they're not going to give you a refund. Whereas if you're printing with inkjet prints, you see the first one right away and you make adjustments to it. But that's a lot more expensive, honestly. I mean, these books can cost maybe $150, and you have a full 100-page portfolio, that's bound, that's, it's like this, and I think the photographic reproduction looks very good, though, is my point.
As a photographer and as a business person, I look at that and say, okay, if I invest $150 into this process, am I going to get any work out of it? And I think the answer is, well, you're definitely not going to get any work out of it if you don't do it. So, and you don't have something to show to people. So it's an investment, and all the money we spend on equipment and all this stuff, it's really not much at all when you think of it in the scheme of things to help you build your client base.
I totally agree.
Now, it's interesting, real quick, you mentioned something about the bleed and making it look like a magazine. Then, as I was thinking, I guess that's then somewhat of a disadvantage where you were talking about earlier about the client that puts things, has a box with their individual pictures and they can put out. It's nice that they can mix and match and customize the portfolio for each client they're going to see, because they can just take prints out and put them in. But at the same time, it does limit the design efforts that you have available.
Yes, and it's a good point that you bring up, because, there's no rule. And I also think that if everybody's doing it one way as well, it's maybe then doing it a different way is a way that makes you stand out. For example, when I started doing these print portfolios this way with digital printing, and often with where there was an image on the cover like this. I don't know how many more times I have to show this, but hey, this guy kind of looks like me. But when I started doing these, I felt like you didn't see as many of them at portfolio reviews, because people were using the old way where you have the paper pages that you can insert and use the posts and everything like that. And I still think that those are legitimate portfolios. I just find that the expense of printing them and the time sometimes to get them done, and also just the heartache if you're printing them yourself on inkjet, there's so much trial and error in getting things not to have a cyan cast on skin tones and crazy stuff. Or you can send it across country to some great printer who can print inkjet prints, but it might cost you $1,000 just to print it in some cases, plus the case, which might cost, a nice case might cost you a couple $100. And so, I think there's a lot of things to weigh. But I think at the end of it, before everyone gives themselves to, a heart attack over this, I think, if you show up to a meeting with something that's presentable and that's, I think, large, generally, like I'm saying large, 11x14 is my ideal size, that's sort of a traditional portfolio size. I review a lot of portfolios at portfolio reviews for photographers organizations like ASMP and APA and Photo Plus and Palm Springs. And anyway, when people bring laptops, it always feels like it's a little more of the amateur hour to me. It feels like it's not as cohesive a presentation. I think also because people are often trying to get the internet to work, and they're also not, they're showing me their desktop as they're trying to fumble around looking for something. And it doesn't feel like the same presentation. And when you're holding a book in your hands, it feels like a presentation. It feels like, you're committed to meeting with this person and showing them something special.
I see exactly where you're going with this, and that if you've taken the time to print the image and put it in a book and bind it, you've committed. You believe in the image, and you believe it represents your work. Where a laptop or a digital is like, oh, well, there's, here's a bunch of images that I have. There's no commitment. There's no, oh, you like this one, you don't like this one. That's it. So do you also do website portfolio designs, and how does that differ from doing a print book?
It's harder to design for the web. I feel like to me, what if you're talking, are you talking more about the edit, or are you talking more about the actual design of the website?
I would assume the edit would be the same. I would think it would be the design that might change. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, somewhat. I mean, obviously you can show a lot more on a website. You can show 12 galleries, and I feel like that's fine. Whereas you can't show the equivalent of 12 galleries of images in a portfolio, because that could be hundreds and hundreds of images.
Now, so one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about categories and how you organize your work.
I give myself a heart attack over choosing categories for every client of mine, because it is a decision. And I do think you consider, I think foremost, you consider your audience, but then you consider, what do you want to push? I mean, be a little selfish. And this is true of print portfolios as well, is what do you want to show the world to get more of that kind of work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
So if you really like to do, automotive photography, and you make that the lowest gallery on your navigation, then there's a better chance that people won't get to that gallery. They might crap out after the first few galleries. So you do have to assume, and you can look at your Google Analytics even for that, to see what pages and what galleries people are going to. And if you see that it's only the top 3 in the navigation, then make sure that that's where you put the meat of what you really want seen. More and more photographers, do overview galleries, or, new galleries, which is the first gallery when you open a website. And what I like about those is that it allows you to sort of take a sampling or a best of from the rest of the website, so that then at least the client will know, okay, they do automotive work and it's really good. And okay, they might spend the time looking for that gallery in the navigation. And then in terms of how many, or in terms of how to structure it, wedding and retail photography, so-called retail photography, should probably not be mixed with commercial photography. An ad agency client doesn't want to see that you're a wedding photographer, generally. Splitting those into 2 websites, really, that were 2 different identities.
Well, then that takes me to the point about personal work. I mean, I've always been a big proponent of personal work. And what is the experience that you've had in working with photographers that have a body of personal work that may be considerably different than their commercial work?
Well, right now there's a trend towards showing personal work anyway. I have clients who go to a lot of portfolio reviews with ad agency creative directors who, if you're not showing your personal work, then sometimes there's something wrong with you, in their mind, because they increasingly are seeing incredible personal projects. And when I say personal projects, and when you're saying personal project, what I mean is portfolio projects, something that you're doing.
Yeah.
You're not being paid to do. It's a mistake not to show your portfolio or personal work, because a lot of times it's also harder to replicate that. If you pick something that's very personal to you, I use an example of, like, let's say it was, if you just focus on old school sneakers, shoelaces, and you made a series of images about that were done so artfully that the world just had to see it. And I'm not joking. Like, you can shoot anything. And I think sometimes the more obscure and personal, the better, because it's harder to replicate that. There's less of a chance of a creative having seen that before. And because of that, they then see you as a creative partner instead of just being a camera operator.
Right.
You are showing a side of yourself. You said it, Lee, that you're showing that you were an art director for that shoot, essentially. Especially if you're doing it across multiple images. I think that's really important for portfolio projects or personal projects, is having at least 10 images, or ideally 10 or more, that are that are in the same style. And because that translates to, okay, that's an ad campaign for Nike, that's a feature story for Vanity Fair, where you might need 8 images to support a story or an ad campaign.
If you've enjoyed the information in this episode, then stay tuned for part 2 of my interview with Neil Binkley. Also, be sure and check out his website at neilbinkley.com. The goal of this channel is to help you as a photographer or filmmaker and to help you grow your business. It doesn't matter to me if you're just an enthusiast or a working pro. Bringing my experience and that of experts like Neil will hopefully help you enjoy the creative aspects of photography and filmmaking. If you have any constructive comments or questions, please leave them below. But my hope is you'll like, subscribe, and click the bell. And if you really want to make my week and put a big smile on my face, then simply sharing a link to this video would be a real treat. As always, remember, in the creative process, technique always trumps technology.